A dying war dog clawed through a mountain wall and exposed the secret powerful men killed to bury. Snow hammered the windshield as 56-year-old former Navy SEAL Caleb Rourke slept in a rusted pickup beside his retired K9 Ghost. Broke, homeless, and haunted by war, Caleb spent his last $10 on an abandoned tollhouse deep in the Colorado mountains. But the moment Ghost stepped inside, the old dog began growling at a stone wall no one had touched for over a century. And what they found behind it put both their lives in danger. Comment 1 if you'd follow your dog into the unknown, or 0 if you'd walk away and tell us where you're watching from. Snow moved sideways across the truck stop parking lot outside Durango, Colorado, blown hard by mountain wind that came down from the San Juan Range after dark like something alive. The old Ford pickup sat alone beneath a flickering sodium lamp near the edge of the lot, its faded green paint buried under salt stains and road grime from 3 winters of hard miles. Rust spread along the wheel wells in dark orange blooms, and the driver's side door had to be lifted slightly before it would close properly. The truck looked tired, in the same way its owner looked tired. Inside, Caleb Rourke sat motionless behind the wheel with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. The heater no longer worked. His breath fogged the windshield in slow white clouds, while snow tapped against the glass like dry fingertips. Beside him, Ghost slept lightly across the bench seat. The Belgian Malinois was 12 years old now, his muzzle turning gray, his joints stiff in the mornings. But even asleep, he carried the alert stillness of a working dog. One ear twitched at every passing sound, a truck air brake 3 rows away, boots crunching through ice, the distant slam of a trailer door. Ghost heard all of it. Caleb stared through the windshield toward the highway, beyond the truck stop where headlights drifted through the storm like ghosts crossing black water. 56 years old, 22 years in the Navy, 9 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a divorce finalized in a courtroom in Albuquerque 6 months earlier, a ranch outside Cortez sold under debt pressure after 2 wildfire seasons destroyed the grazing land. A military consulting contract terminated after a panic episode during a training exercise sent him diving behind concrete barriers when a helicopter backfired nearby. Then the apartment. That had been the last thing. The landlord in Farmington had knocked on Caleb's door after neighbors reported shouting in the middle of the night. Caleb barely remembered the nightmare itself. Only flashes remained: dust, heat, blood soaking through desert sand, someone screaming over comms for extraction. When he opened the apartment door, he'd been holding a pistol. Not aimed, not loaded, but the landlord had seen enough. 3 days later, Caleb and Ghost were sleeping in the truck that had been 11 nights ago. The truck stop lights buzzed overhead. Ghost lifted his head slowly and looked at Caleb. "You hungry?" The dog blinked once. Caleb reached behind the seat and pulled out the last packet of beef jerky from a grocery sack. He tore it open carefully and handed half to Ghost before chewing the other half himself. The meat tasted like salt and smoke and cardboard. Outside, a snowplow crawled through the parking lot, pushing gray slush into frozen ridges. Ghost ate slowly. Caleb scratched behind the dog's ear absently. "You remember Kandahar?" Ghost's ears twitched. "Course you do." Caleb leaned his head back against the seat. For a long time, he listened to the storm. Most people thought loneliness sounded quiet. It didn't. Loneliness sounded like truck engines idling at 2 in the morning while nobody knew your name. It sounded like a wedding ring sitting in the center console, because you still couldn't throw it away. It sounded like trying not to think about the men who didn't come home. Ghost shifted closer against Caleb's leg. Warmth, weight. Proof that something in the world still trusted him. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. Instantly the memory came back. Afghanistan. Helmand Province. Night operation. Dust storm conditions. The explosion hit the second vehicle in the convoy, hard enough to lift it sideways. Caleb remembered the pressure wave first, then silence. then screaming. He remembered concrete fragments raining down through darkness, while Ghost dragged at the back of his vest, with his teeth trying to pull him from collapsing rubble. 2 men had died that night. Ghost had saved Caleb. The memory disappeared as fast as it came. Caleb opened his eyes again and exhaled slowly. The truck stop diner across the lot still had lights on. A neon coffee cup blinked in the window through swirling snow. He checked the time. 1:17 a.m. Sleep wasn't coming. It rarely did anymore. Caleb reached for the old laptop sitting on the passenger side floorboard beneath a stack of maps and charging cables. The machine took nearly a minute to boot up, the screen glowing pale blue across the dark cab. Ghost watched him quietly. Caleb opened the county surplus property page, mostly because he needed something to look at besides his own thoughts. Old storage lots, tax default trailers, flood-damaged cabins. Most of the listings were junk. Then one photograph stopped him. The image showed a small stone building, buried in pine forest, somewhere deep in the mountains. The caption read, "Former San Juan County toll structure, built 1884 access road, condemned property landlocked auction minimum." $10. Caleb stared at the photo. The toll house stood alone, beside what looked like an abandoned mountain road, half buried under snow and fallen timber. The walls were rough gray stone. One side of the slate roof had partially collapsed inward. A chimney leaned slightly west. Something about it felt familiar, not visually, emotionally, like seeing another exhausted thing still standing after everyone else had walked away from it. Caleb zoomed in, heavy oak door, iron hardware, mountain terrain. Remote enough nobody would bother him. Ghost suddenly lifted his head sharply. A low growl rolled from deep in the dog's chest. Caleb looked over. Ghost wasn't looking at the storm outside. He was staring directly at the photograph on the laptop screen. The growl deepened. Caleb frowned. "What is it?" Ghost stood slowly on the bench seat, ears forward now, body rigid. His eyes remained fixed on the image of the toll house. Then the dog gave a quiet warning bark. One bark, sharp, controlled. The kind he used overseas when he sensed movement, before human eyes caught it. Caleb's pulse slowed instinctively. Years of training slid back into place without permission. He studied the photograph again. Stone walls, broken roof, snow, nothing else. Still, Ghost kept staring. Caleb moved the cursor away from the image. Ghost relaxed slightly. He moved it back. The growl returned immediately. Caleb felt the small hairs rise along his arms. "You seeing something I'm not?" Outside, the wind slammed snow against the truck hard enough to rock it slightly. Ghost stepped closer to the screen. Then he did something Caleb had not seen him do in years. The dog placed one paw gently against the laptop beside the image of the toll house. Not aggressive. Intentional. Like he was trying to point something out. Caleb stared at him for a long moment. In Afghanistan, ignoring Ghost's instincts had gotten people hurt, sometimes killed. Dogs noticed things humans missed. Scent, stress, structural instability, hidden movement, chemical traces trapped in concrete and dust. Ghost had once alerted on an explosive buried beneath a road 6 hours before military scanners detected it. Caleb trusted him more than most human beings. The truck stop lights flickered again. Caleb looked back at the listing details. $10, no utilities. Road officially condemned after a mudslide 8 years earlier. Property considered uninhabitable. He almost laughed. Uninhabitable sounded about right. Ghost finally settled back down beside him, though his eyes never fully left the screen. Caleb rubbed a hand across his beard slowly. "What do you think, partner?" Snow swirled across the windshield. For the first time in months, something inside him shifted. Not hope exactly. Hope was too dangerous, but maybe direction. A place to stand still for a while. A place where nobody expected anything from him. No crowds, no helicopters, no fireworks. No landlords pounding on doors, just stone walls and mountain silence. Caleb clicked the auction page open fully. The listing ended at noon the next day. He checked his bank account balance afterward. $43.18. He stared at the number, then at the Tollhouse again. Ghost rested his head on Caleb's knee. Outside, a freight truck groaned onto the highway, heading north into darkness. Caleb reached down and scratched the old dog behind the ears. "All right," he whispered finally. Ghost looked up at him. "We'll go take a look." The dog's tail thumped once softly against the seat. But even after Caleb shut the laptop and the truck cab went dark again, Ghost remained awake, watching, listening, staring out into the snow as if somewhere beyond the storm, high in the black mountains above Silverton. Something inside that abandoned toll house was already waiting for them. Something hidden, something old, something Ghost had felt before Caleb ever touched the road. The snowstorm eased just before dawn, leaving the mountains hidden behind a pale gray sky that looked heavy enough to collapse onto the earth. Caleb woke stiff in the driver's seat, with pain running from the base of his neck down into his shoulders. Ghost was already awake, watching the highway, always watching. For a few seconds, Caleb forgot where he was. That happened more often lately. Sleep and memory tangled together until Afghanistan, New Mexico, and Colorado all became the same cold, lonely place. Then the truck stop came back into focus. Diesel fumes, snowplows, coffee smell drifting through cracked doors. Ghost shifted when Caleb moved, his old joints clicking softly. "Morning, partner." The dog leaned his head forward and pressed it once against Caleb's chest. A habit from years ago. A check-in. "Still here? Still breathing?" Caleb rubbed the dog's neck before reaching for the ignition. The truck coughed twice before finally turning over with a rough metallic growl. The county office opened at 8. By 9:30, Caleb Rourke legally owned an abandoned toll house high in the San Juan Mountains for $10.16 after tax fees. The clerk barely looked at him during the transaction. "You understand there's no maintained access road?" Caleb nodded. "No utilities either." Another nod. "The county isn't responsible if the structure collapses." The woman finally looked up from her paperwork then, studying Caleb carefully over reading glasses. "You planning to live there?" Caleb slid the receipt into his coat pocket. "I'm planning to stand still for a while." The woman didn't know what to say to that. Outside the courthouse, Ghost jumped carefully into the truck while Caleb unfolded the old county map the clerk had handed him. A faded red line twisted north through the mountains beyond Silverton. County Route 9A. Condemned after landslide damage. Travel not advised. Caleb stared at the route for several quiet seconds. Not advised had never stopped him before. By late morning, the storm clouds began breaking apart over the mountains. Sunlight cut through in sharp silver beams that turned the snowfields blinding white. The farther north Caleb drove, the steeper the roads became. Durango disappeared behind him. Then farms, then houses, then almost everything. The San Juan Mountains rose enormous against the horizon, jagged black rock and pine forests dusted with fresh snow. The roads narrowed into winding climbs along cliffs where frozen rivers cut through deep valleys below. Ghost sat upright now, ears forward. Alert, Caleb noticed it immediately. "You know where we're going already." Ghost stared ahead through the windshield. The truck climbed another switchback curve. An hour later, Caleb reached Silverton, a small mining town buried beneath winter. Old brick storefronts lined the main street beneath wooden signs faded by weather and time. Pickup trucks sat parked outside diners and feed stores, while smoke drifted from chimneys into the thin mountain air. Caleb stopped at a gas station to fill the tank with what little money remained. The station owner eyed the old truck. "You heading up County 9? Caleb glanced over. "That obvious?" The man nodded toward the mountain road north of town. "Road washed out years ago. Nobody lives up there anymore." Caleb said nothing. The man looked at Ghost inside the truck. "That your dog?" "Partner." The man nodded once like he understood the distinction. "Storm coming back tonight," he warned. "Wouldn't get caught up there after dark." Caleb thanked him and drove on. The paved road ended 12 miles north of Silverton. After that came dirt. Or what used to be dirt before years of snowmelt and erosion tore half the mountain road apart. The truck bounced violently through frozen ruts, while pine branches scraped along the doors. Snow still covered parts of the old route in uneven drifts. Several times Caleb had to stop and clear fallen branches by hand. The deeper they climbed into the mountains, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no power lines, no houses, only forest. Tall ponderosa pines crowded the road on both sides, their trunks dark with moisture, their upper branches creaking softly in the wind. Somewhere deeper in the trees, Caleb heard running water beneath ice. Ghost suddenly stood. Low growl. Caleb slowed the truck instantly. What is it? Ghost stared toward the muddy shoulder beside the road. Caleb followed his gaze. Tire tracks, fresh ones, not old county maintenance tracks buried under snow. These cut sharply through fresh slush no more than a day or two old, large truck tires. Caleb stopped the pickup. The engine idled softly while he studied the tracks. They continued north, same direction they were headed. A cold feeling moved quietly through him. Nobody was supposed to use this road anymore. Ghost whined low in his throat. Yeah, Caleb muttered. I see it too. He kept driving. The mountains closed tighter around them. In some places, the old road narrowed so sharply that one wrong turn would send the truck sliding hundreds of feet down frozen slopes into black timber below. Then finally Caleb saw it. The Tollhouse stood beside the abandoned road exactly where the listing photograph had shown. Alone. Waiting. The structure sat at the edge of a clearing surrounded by pine forest and broken stone fencing nearly swallowed by snow. Time had pushed the old building halfway back into the mountain itself. Moss crawled across the stones. One side of the slate roof sagged inward where heavy winters had finally broken the support beams beneath. The chimney leaned west slightly, still standing barely. Caleb parked the truck and stepped out into knee-deep snow. Silence hit him immediately. Not normal silence, mountain silence. The kind so complete a man could hear his own heartbeat beneath it. Ghost jumped from the truck and stood perfectly still beside Caleb. The dog's ears rose slowly, watching the toll house. The oak front door remained chained shut with rusted iron wrapped around heavy handles. But that wasn't the first thing Caleb noticed. The wall, west side near the chimney. One section of mortar looked newer than the rest. Not fresh exactly, but newer, different color, different texture. His eyes narrowed automatically. Training, observation, pattern recognition. The same instincts that once kept him alive overseas still lived somewhere beneath the exhaustion. Caleb walked closer. The building measured maybe 12 feet across, thick fieldstone walls, narrow window openings, solid construction, built to survive mountain winters. And yet someone had repaired part of the west wall long after the rest of the structure aged. Why? Ghost moved ahead of him now, sniffing slowly along the stones. Then the dog froze, rigid. Caleb followed his line of sight toward the trees. Nothing there, only forest and drifting snow. Still, Ghost remained motionless for several seconds before finally relaxing. Caleb felt the unease settle deeper into his chest. He turned slowly, studying the clearing around the toll house. That was when he noticed something else. A cigarette butt near the porch stones. Not old. Still dried despite the snow. Somebody had been here recently, very recently. Ghost gave another low warning growl. Caleb rested one hand unconsciously near the knife on his belt. The old instincts kept returning whether he wanted them or not. Watch the terrain. Watch the tree line. Watch for movement. A gust of wind swept down through the clearing, carrying the sharp scent of pine and frozen earth. Then, far off down the road behind them, Caleb heard the faint sound of an engine. He turned instantly. The sound disappeared almost immediately. Maybe only wind through the mountains. Maybe not. Ghost kept staring south down the abandoned road. After a long moment, Caleb forced himself to exhale slowly. "You're doing it again," he muttered to himself. Hypervigilance. His therapist used that word before Caleb stopped going. Sometimes the danger was real. Sometimes it was memory pretending to be danger. The problem was he could never fully tell the difference anymore. Snow began falling again lightly through the trees. Caleb looked back toward the toll house. Broken roof, collapsed fence, condemned road, forgotten place. And somehow, standing there in the cold mountain silence beside Ghost, it already felt more honest than anywhere he had lived in years. By late afternoon, Caleb drove back south several miles until he found a roadside diner near the edge of Silverton. A faded sign above the door read, "Mabel's Diner." Hot coffee all day inside, warmth wrapped around him immediately. The diner smelled like bacon grease, coffee, and wet wool coats drying near heaters. A football game played softly on an old television above the counter, while locals sat drinking coffee beneath mounted elk heads and mining photographs from another century. Ghost settled beside the booth automatically. Several people glanced at Caleb, then at the dog, then looked away again. Mountain towns respected silence. A waitress approached, carrying a coffee pot. She looked somewhere in her early 40s with dark hair tied back beneath a knit cap and tired eyes that still held kindness. "You folks look frozen." "Working on it," Caleb said. She filled his cup. Ghost watched her carefully but stayed relaxed. "That's a beautiful dog," she said softly. "His name's Ghost." She smiled faintly. "Fits him." Her name tag read Evelyn. Caleb ordered eggs and coffee, nothing else. While he ate, Evelyn glanced out the diner window toward the mountains. "You heading north again tonight?" Caleb looked up. "How'd you know? Nobody comes through here this time of year unless they're lost or headed someplace they shouldn't be." Caleb almost smiled. "Bought an old property up there." Her expression changed slightly. "What property?" "The toll house off County 9. Silence. It's not dramatic, just immediate. Even the cook behind the counter glanced up briefly. Evelyn set the coffee pot down slowly. "You bought that place?" "For $10. She stared at him another second before shaking her head quietly. "Nobody stays up there long." "Why?" Evelyn looked toward the snowy windows again. "My grandfather used to talk about that road." Her voice lowered slightly. "Said bad things happened there back during the mining days." Caleb waited. Silver shipments disappeared. Men vanished during storms. One tollkeeper supposedly went missing without a trace in the 1800s. Ghost lifted his head. Evelyn noticed. "That dog hears everything, doesn't he?" "Usually before I do." Outside, snow thickened again across the mountains. Evelyn looked back toward Caleb carefully. "You military?" "Used to be." She nodded like she already knew. "Whatever happened to you?" she said quietly. "Don't let that mountain finish the job." Caleb looked down into his coffee. For a moment he had no answer. Then Ghost suddenly stood beside the booth, alert again. Watching the diner windows, Caleb turned slightly. Outside across the road, a black pickup truck sat idling beneath falling snow, its headlights off, engine running. Inside, somebody that I dined from behind tinted glass. Ghost growled, low. "Dangerous." The truck pulled away a few seconds later and disappeared north toward the mountain road, toward the toll house. Caleb stared after it through the falling snow while something cold and familiar settled deep inside him. Not fear, recognition. The feeling a soldier gets when he realizes a situation is no longer random. And somewhere high above Silverton, hidden among pine forests and abandoned roads, the old toll house waited in gathering darkness, holding its secrets, waiting for Caleb and Ghost to return. By the time Caleb drove back up the mountain road, darkness had swallowed the San Juan Range whole. Snow drifted steadily through the trees, turning the forest into shifting layers of black and white beneath the truck's headlights. The road had become harder to follow after sunset. Ice spread across the narrow switchbacks in dull silver sheets, and several times the Ford's rear tires slid close enough to the edge that Caleb felt the truck lean toward empty space. Ghost remained standing on the bench seat the entire drive, watching forward, alert. The farther they climbed, the more restless he became. Caleb noticed every change, the rigid ears, the fixed stare, the low tension running through the dog's shoulders. Military working dogs didn't waste energy reacting to nothing. That fact sat heavily in Caleb's chest. When the Tollhouse finally appeared between the trees again, it looked less like a building and more like part of the mountain itself. Snow coated the broken slate roof. The chimney rose crooked against the storm clouds. Pine branches scraped softly across the old stone walls whenever the wind shifted. Caleb parked beside the clearing and shut off the engine. Silence rushed in immediately. No highway, no diner, no human voices, only mountain wind moving through dark timber. Ghost jumped from the truck before Caleb opened his own door. The dog landed stiffly in the snow and immediately began circling the Tollhouse perimeter with slow, deliberate steps. Checking, searching. Caleb grabbed his duffel bag, flashlight, and the old pry bar he'd bought in Silverton earlier that afternoon. The chain around the front door looked older up close. Rust had eaten through sections of the links, but somebody had wrapped the lock carefully once upon a time. Not random vandalism, intentional closure, as if someone had wanted the building sealed. Ghost stopped near the west wall, growled, then looked directly at Caleb. "I know." Caleb slid the pry bar between the chain links and pulled hard. Metal groaned sharply through the clearing. The second pull snapped the rusted lock apart. The heavy oak door opened inward 3 inches before sticking against warped floorboards. Cold air spilled out from inside, carrying the smell of wet stone, old ash, and wood rot. Ghost did not enter. That bothered Caleb more than he wanted to admit. The dog stood frozen at the threshold, staring into darkness. "You've breached compounds in Kandahar," Caleb muttered quietly. "Don't tell me an old shack scares you." Ghost's eyes never moved. Caleb clicked on the flashlight. Dust floated through the beam. The Tollhouse interior was smaller than it had appeared outside. 1 room, thick fieldstone walls, a narrow fireplace built into the western side. Rusted iron hooks mounted near the ceiling beams, a cracked wooden shelf sagging above the hearth. The floor consisted of rough stone worn smooth by a century of boots. Old initials had been carved into one ceiling beam long ago. JH 1889. Caleb stepped slowly inside. The air felt strangely preserved, like the room had been waiting in silence for years. Ghost finally crossed the threshold behind him, but reluctantly. The dog's nails clicked softly across stone as he paced the room once, twice, then stopped near the fireplace. Watching the west wall, Caleb swept the flashlight beam carefully over the interior. No furniture, no debris besides collapsed plaster and dead pine needles blown through roof gaps over the years. But there were signs somebody had entered before. Boot prints in the dust near the fireplace. Recent enough the edges remained sharp. Caleb crouched low automatically. Size 11 maybe. Heavy tread, work boots, at least 2 separate patterns. Ghost growled softly again. Caleb stood slowly. "All right," he whispered. "Now I really don't like this place." Outside, the wind rose harder against the roof. One loose slate tile clattered somewhere above them. Ghost flinched instantly. Caleb noticed that too. Not fear exactly. Memory. He'd seen it before after Afghanistan. Loud, metallic noises still affected the dog during storms. Truth was, they both carried pieces of the war home inside them. Caleb dropped his duffel beside the fireplace and began unpacking supplies methodically. Blankets, flashlight batteries, canned soup, jerky, a portable propane burner. Routine calmed him, always had. Task orientation, establish shelter, check exits, monitor terrain. Ghost continued pacing. Window, door, fireplace, west wall. Repeat. "You gonna do that all night?" The dog ignored him. Caleb knelt by the fireplace and brushed away old soot with gloved fingers. The stonework was solid despite the leaning chimney outside. Whoever built the Tollhouse had known mountain construction well. The mortar caught his attention again. Most of it had aged the same pale gray color, except one section, near the western corner. Subtle difference, smother texture, less weather damage. Somebody had repaired that area years after the original construction. Why? A sharp gust hit the roof overhead. The entire structure creaked. Ghost spun instantly toward the ceiling, muscles tight. Caleb felt it too now. The building carried tension inside its frame. Pressure, shift, years of structural fatigue hidden beneath stone. He moved carefully toward the center of the room and aimed the flashlight upward. One roof beam above the chimney had partially split. Snowmelt dripped slowly through a crack overhead. Caleb cursed quietly under his breath. The chimney was pulling weight unevenly. Another winter or two, and the whole western side might collapse. Outside, snow thickened harder against the windows. Caleb checked his watch. Almost 10 p.m. Too dangerous to drive back down tonight. He set up blankets near the eastern wall, away from the damaged chimney, and lit a small propane lantern. Warm amber light spread softly across the stone room. Ghost still refused to settle. The dog stood near the fireplace, staring at the repaired wall section with unwavering focus. "What's in there?" Caleb asked quietly. Ghost's ears twitched. Then suddenly the dog crossed the room fast and shoved his nose hard against Caleb's hand. "Urgent." Caleb frowned.
"What?"
Ghost pulled backward toward the eastern wall, away from the chimney. Then looked upward. Caleb's stomach tightened instantly. Training again. Warning behavior. The same behavior Ghost used before incoming mortar fire overseas. "Easy," Caleb muttered. The wind slammed the Tollhouse violently. A deep cracking sound echoed overhead. Caleb moved fast. Years disappeared. Instinct took over before conscious thought. He grabbed the lantern and rolled sideways across the floor, just as part of the chimney structure exploded downward where he had been kneeling seconds earlier. Stone crashed across the fireplace in a shower of sparks and dust. The entire room shook. Ghost barked sharply. Caleb covered his head while debris rained across the floor. Then silence. Dust drifted through lantern light in pale clouds. Caleb's pulse thundered in his ears. For several long seconds, neither man nor dog moved. Then Ghost pushed his nose hard against Caleb's shoulder, checking him. "Alive, alive." Caleb exhaled shakily. "Good catch," he whispered hoarsely. The fallen chimney stones covered the exact spot where Caleb had stood moments earlier. Another 2 seconds, and the collapse might have crushed him. Ghost stayed pressed against him, while the old soul fought down the sudden flood of adrenaline. But the collapse had triggered something else too, a memory. Concrete dust, collapsed walls, screaming over radios. Caleb squeezed his eyes shut instinctively. Afghanistan came roaring back in fragments, night vision flashes, blood on shattered pavement. One of his teammates trapped beneath rubble after an IED blast. Ghost barking somewhere through smoke. Caleb's breathing shortened sharply. Not here, not now. His hands trembled. The Tollhouse faded. The mountains disappeared. Suddenly he was back overseas, hearing men die in darkness. Ghost whined sharply beside him, grounding him. Present. Caleb forced himself to focus on the dog's fur beneath his fingers. Rough, warm, real. Slowly the panic loosened its grip enough for him to breathe again. Outside, snow hissed softly through the trees. Inside the Tollhouse, broken chimney stones lay scattered across the floor like fresh graves. Ghost finally settled beside Caleb against the eastern wall. But he did not sleep, not once through the long mountain night. Every hour Caleb woke to find the old Malinois sitting upright in lantern light, watching the west wall, watching the darkness beyond it. As if somewhere inside the ancient stone itself, something remained hidden, waiting, and Ghost could feel it breathing beneath the mountain. Morning came slowly to the San Juan wilderness. Gray light filtered through the broken roof slates in thin frozen beams while wind moved softly through the pine trees outside. The storm had passed during the night, leaving fresh snow spread untouched across the clearing around the Tollhouse. Inside, the old stone room smelled of cold ash and dust from the collapsed chimney. Caleb woke stiff beneath his blankets against the eastern wall. For one disoriented moment, he thought he was back in a forward operating base overseas. Stone walls, frozen air, sleeping in boots with one hand near a weapon. Then, Ghost lifted his head beside him, and the mountain Tollhouse returned. The dog had not moved far all night. He still faced the western wall, watching. Caleb sat up slowly, joints aching. At 56, sleeping on stone floors punished him harder than it once had. His left knee throbbed from an old helicopter landing injury, and the scar along his ribs tightened in the cold. Ghost immediately stood and crossed the room toward the damaged chimney. Careful now, focused. Caleb watched him quietly. You really don't like that wall. The dog sniffed along the repaired mortar again, nose moving slowly over the stone joints. Then he scratched once, not random, specific, same spot. Caleb rose and walked toward the western side of the room. Morning light revealed more details than he had noticed the night before. The repaired section stood roughly 4 feet wide beside the fireplace, its mortar slightly darker than the surrounding stone. Different composition, different age. The original mortar throughout the Tollhouse had weathered pale after more than a century of mountain winters. This section hadn't. Caleb ran gloved fingers across the surface, smooth, less brittle. He leaned closer. There it was again, a faint difference in moisture. The repaired mortar absorbed meltwater differently than the older sections around it, not obvious to most people. But Caleb had spent years learning to notice structural inconsistencies in hostile environments. Hidden compartments, reinforced walls, weak load points, insurgent caches disguised inside ordinary buildings. Observation kept men alive. Ghost scratched the same spot again, harder this time. You smell something in there? The dog gave a soft whine. Caleb stepped back and studied the wall carefully. No visible seam, no hollow sound when he knocked against the stone. Still, something about it bothered him. Outside, sunlight finally pushed through the clouds. Snow glowed bright beyond the narrow Tollhouse windows. Caleb decided movement would help clear his head. He spent the morning working, routine, task, structure, the same medicine soldiers had used forever. He cleared fallen chimney stones into neat piles outside the Tollhouse. Then he climbed carefully onto the sagging roof to inspect the damage. Several support beams had rotted through from years of water exposure, but the structure itself remained surprisingly solid. Whoever built the Tollhouse had known mountain weather intimately. The walls were nearly 2 feet thick. The foundation sat directly against bedrock, built to endure. As Caleb worked, Ghost stayed close but never fully relaxed. Every few minutes, the dog returned to the western wall inside the Tollhouse, as if checking on something unseen. By noon, clouds began gathering again over the mountains. Caleb climbed down from the roof and walked the clearing perimeter. That was when he found the tracks again. Fresh boot prints near the tree line south of the Tollhouse. Partially covered by last night's snowfall, but still visible. Somebody had approached the clearing recently, watched the building, then left. Caleb crouched low beside the tracks, 2 men minimum, heavy boots. One deeper impression suggesting larger body weight. Not hunters. Movement pattern too cautious. Ghost stood beside him with raised hackles. You saw them before I did, didn't you? The dog kept staring into the trees. Far down the mountain slope, wind moved through pines with a sound like distant surf. Caleb's chest tightened slightly. He recognized the feeling returning again. Hyper-awareness. The constant scanning. Part of him hated it. Another part trusted it completely. The same instincts that made civilian life exhausting had once kept entire teams alive. A truck door slammed somewhere far below on the mountain road. Ghost snapped toward the sound instantly. Caleb stood. A few moments later, he saw an old Jeep climbing slowly through the trees toward the clearing. Not the black truck from yesterday. This vehicle was faded red with county plates and snow chains on the tires. The Jeep stopped near the Tollhouse. Evelyn Pike stepped out carrying a cardboard box bundled beneath a wool blanket. You're still alive, she called. Depends who you ask. A faint smile crossed her face. Ghost watched her approach carefully, then relaxed slightly when she spoke. That means I passed inspection? He hasn't bitten you yet. Good enough for me. She walked carefully through the snow toward the Tollhouse. Up close, Caleb noticed the tiredness around her eyes more clearly today. Not weakness exactly, just the look of somebody who had carried responsibility for too long. Evelyn glanced toward the damaged chimney stones outside. Well, she said softly, looks like the mountain welcomed you properly. Chimney collapsed last night. Her expression tightened. You hurt? Ghost warned me first. She looked down at the Malinois. Smart dog. He's smarter than I am. Ghost stood beside Caleb quietly while Evelyn uncovered the cardboard box. Food, coffee, canned stew, wool blankets. Caleb frowned immediately. I can't pay you for this. Didn't ask you to. I don't take charity. Evelyn looked directly at him. Then consider it mountain hospitality before you freeze to death, Caleb almost argued. But the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the thermos stopped him. Inside the Tollhouse, Evelyn stood silently studying the stone walls. Strange place, she murmured. You've been here before? My grandfather brought me once when I was little. She walked slowly near the fireplace. Said the old tollkeeper disappeared during a blizzard sometime in the 1800s. Caleb glanced toward the repaired wall. Disappeared how? Nobody knows. Ghost suddenly moved between them and the western wall again. Rigid, focused. Evelyn noticed immediately. He keeps doing that? All night. She stepped closer to the repaired section carefully. My grandfather used to say miners hid things in these mountains all the time. Silver, payroll cash, smuggled ore. She touched the mortar lightly. Sometimes bodies too. The words settled heavily inside the small room. Ghost began scratching again. Hard, persistent. His claws scraped mortar dust onto the floor. Easy, Caleb said sharply. But Ghost ignored him. The scratching intensified. Desperate now. Caleb grabbed the dog gently by the collar. That stopped him, but only barely. Ghost stared at Caleb with an intensity that unsettled him deeply. The same expression he used before detecting explosives overseas. Absolute certainty. Caleb released the collar slowly. What are you trying to tell me? The dog returned to the wall immediately. Evelyn folded her arms against the cold. You know, she said quietly. Animals don't usually obsess over nothing. Caleb looked toward the mortar again. No visible opening, no obvious compartment. Still, his instincts kept circling back to it. Outside, wind rose stronger through the clearing. Pine branches knocked softly together overhead. Evelyn walked toward the doorway. I should head back before the road freezes again. Caleb nodded. Thanks for the supplies. She hesitated, then looked at him carefully. You were military, right? SEAL. The word hung between them quietly. She nodded once like it explained more than he intended. My brother was Army. Her voice softened slightly. Came back different. Caleb said nothing. Most civilians asked questions. Evelyn didn't. That mattered. She glanced toward Ghost. Looks like he's still standing watch for you. Caleb looked down at the old Malinois. Yeah, Evelyn adjusted her coat near the door. For what it's worth, she said quietly. Sometimes dogs know what people refuse to see. Then she left. The jeep disappeared slowly back down the mountain road through drifting snow. By late afternoon, the sky darkened again. Caleb reinforced sections of the roof with scavenged timber from a collapsed shed behind the Tollhouse. Ghost followed him constantly except for brief returns inside to check the western wall. Always the wall, always the same spot. As darkness approached, Caleb finally carried his flashlight and pry bar back toward the fireplace. The room felt colder tonight. Still, he knelt beside the repaired mortar section. Up close, he noticed something new. Tiny scrape marks around one stone, subtle, almost invisible. Like somebody years ago had removed it once before. His pulse slowed slightly. Ghost stood directly behind him now, watching. Caleb tapped the stone lightly with the pry bar. Solid. He tapped the surrounding stones, then paused. One sounded different, not hollow exactly, but thinner. The old seal felt adrenaline stir quietly beneath his exhaustion. Outside, wind howled through the mountains. Inside the tollhouse, Ghost gave a low warning growl deep in his chest. And somewhere beyond the western wall, hidden behind stone and mortar and a century of silence, something waited in darkness for Caleb Rourke to finally uncover it. Night settled hard across the San Juan Mountains. Wind swept through the pine forest in long, hollow waves, rattling dead branches against the tollhouse roof, while snow drifted sideways through the clearing. Inside, lantern light flickered across the stone walls, throwing moving shadows through the small room. Caleb knelt beside the fireplace with the pry bar resting across his thighs. Ghost stood shoulder to shoulder with him, watching the wall. The old Malinois had not taken his eyes off that section of mortar for nearly 2 days. Now Caleb finally understood why. He ran gloved fingers slowly along the stone. Ghost kept scratching there, a slight edge, almost invisible beneath old mortar lines. Whoever repaired this wall had done careful work. Military careful, intentional careful. The kind meant to survive inspection. Caleb slid the thin edge of the pry bar gently into the mortar seam. The metal scraped softly. Nothing happened at first. Then a thin line of dust spilled downward. Ghost stepped back instantly. Alert, Caleb looked at him. You knew. The dog's ears stayed forward. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far beyond the mountains. Another storm moving in. Caleb pushed harder against the pry bar. The stone shifted, only slightly, but enough. His pulse slowed automatically the way it used to before entering hostile buildings overseas. Everything narrowed into detail: breathing, angles, weight distribution, exit points. He worked the pry bar carefully around the edges. Old mortar cracked away in dry strips. The stone loosened another inch. Then suddenly the entire fieldstone slid forward with a deep grinding sound. Caleb caught it before it crashed to the floor. Heavy, much heavier than expected. Ghost barked sharply once. The opening behind the stone revealed complete darkness. Caleb froze. Not because of fear, because of certainty. Somebody had hidden something here deliberately. He lifted the lantern closer. A narrow compartment sat buried between the inner and outer layers of the tollhouse wall, roughly 2 feet deep, dry despite the storms outside, and inside rested an iron lockbox coated black with age. Beside it lay several rolled maps tied with leather cord, and beneath them, paper, letters, dozens of them. Caleb stared silently for several long seconds. Ghost moved closer beside him, nose working hard now, inhaling the stale, trapped scent leaking from the hidden compartment after more than a century sealed inside stone. Old paper, iron dust, history. Carefully, Caleb reached inside and lifted out the lockbox first. Heavy, solid forged iron with a brass latch darkened green from oxidation. No visible markings except one scratched set of initials near the bottom edge. SV. Caleb set the box carefully onto the floor beside the lantern. Then he removed the maps. The paper crackled softly in his hands. Old route surveys, mining roads, hand-drawn terrain markings covering large sections of the San Juan Mountains. One map showed the toll road itself winding through valleys north of Silverton, toward abandoned mining territory, deeper in the mountains. Several locations had been circled in faded black ink. One marking appeared repeatedly. Marker 9. Ghost whined low. Caleb unfolded one of the letters carefully. The handwriting was sharp and disciplined despite age. October 3rd, 1891. To whoever finds this. If this compartment has been opened, then either I am dead or the road itself has finally been forgotten. My name is Silas Vale. I served with the Union Army before becoming keeper of this toll station in the mountains above Silverton. Caleb stopped reading for a moment. Outside, snow struck the roof harder now. Silas Vale, the missing tollkeeper Evelyn mentioned. Ghost suddenly spun toward the door, growling, deep, dangerous. Caleb's body reacted instantly. Years of training snapped back into place. He lowered the letter slowly and reached for the flashlight. Then he heard it too, an engine, somewhere outside beyond the trees. Headlights suddenly swept across the Tollhouse windows. Ghost barked violently. Caleb extinguished the lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the room. The truck engine outside idled low in the clearing. Not Evelyn's Jeep, too large. Caleb crouched beside the wall automatically, while Ghost positioned himself near the doorway with silent, predatory focus. Headlights moved slowly across the stone interior through cracks in the windows. Searching, Caleb's heartbeat stayed calm now, not because he felt safe, because danger made sense to him in ways normal life no longer did. Voices drifted faintly through the storm outside. 2 men, maybe 3. Hard to tell beneath the wind. A truck door slammed. Boots crunched through snow. Ghost's lips peeled back silently. Caleb rested one hand lightly against the dog's shoulder. Steady. Wait. A flashlight beam passed across the front window, then another, searching the room. The men outside stopped near the porch. Looks like somebody's inside. The voice carried faintly through the storm. Another man answered. Truck tracks fresh. Caleb stayed perfectly still. Ghost trembled beside him, with controlled aggression. A heavy knock struck the front door, once, then again. Nobody's looking for trouble, the first voice called out. Just want to talk. Caleb said nothing. Silence stretched. The wind groaned through the trees. Finally another voice muttered outside. Told you somebody bought the damn place. The first man spoke again louder this time. You Caleb Rourke. Caleb's eyes narrowed instantly. How the hell did they know his name already? Ghost growled harder. The flashlight beams shifted away briefly while the men spoke quietly among themselves. Caleb used the moment to slide the letters and maps back into the hidden compartment, except for one folded page he tucked into his coat pocket instinctively. The lockbox remained beside him, too heavy to move quickly. Outside, Boots approached the door again. Mr. Rourke, the voice called calmly. My employer would like a conversation before things become complicated. Employer. Not county workers then. Not tourists. Something colder moved through Caleb's chest now. This wasn't random. The men already knew. His name, the property, the Tollhouse had been opened. Ghost suddenly lunged toward the doorway with an explosive bark. At the exact same moment, Caleb heard another sound outside, metal striking stone. Someone moving around the west side of the building, toward the hidden wall. Caleb rose instantly. Too fast. His knee hit loose chimney stone, sending debris clattering across the floor. Outside, silence snapped tight. There, flashlights slammed toward the windows. Ghost exploded into furious barking. Caleb grabbed the lantern, the lockbox, and the pry bar in one motion while backing deeper into darkness near the eastern wall. The front door handle rattled violently, locked only by age and swollen wood now. Another shove hit the door, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. Ghost planted himself directly between Caleb and the entrance, fangs exposed. Every inch of the old war dog suddenly alive again. Easy, one of the men shouted outside. Nobody wants problems here. Another heavy impact hit the door. The oak groaned inward. Caleb's breathing stayed controlled, measured, not panic. Assessment. 3 men minimum. Unknown intentions. Limited exits. He scanned the Tollhouse interior automatically. Window too narrow, roof unstable. Stone walls thick enough to hold. Ghost barked again with terrifying force. Then, a bright beam swept suddenly across the western side of the room. One of the men outside had found the disturbed mortar and missing fieldstone. Silence followed. Then Caleb heard the voice again, low this time, tight with alarm. Somebody already opened it. The words landed heavily inside the Tollhouse. Whoever these men worked for, they knew exactly what had been hidden inside the wall. And now they knew Caleb had found it first. Outside, the storm intensified around the mountain clearing, while Ghost stood rigid before the door like a soldier guarding his final post. And for the first time since arriving in the San Juan Mountains, Caleb Rourke understood with absolute certainty that whatever had been buried inside this Tollhouse had never truly been forgotten. Someone had been searching for it all along. The storm howled around the Tollhouse like an animal trying to tear its way inside. Snow hammered the roof. Wind pushed hard against the old oak door while Ghost stood rigid before it, every muscle tight beneath his gray-flecked coat. His growl rolled through the small stone room, low and steady, the sound of a predator warning strangers to stay back. Outside, boots shifted across snow. 3 men. Caleb tracked each movement automatically through sound alone. One near the porch, one circling west toward the repaired wall, another farther back near the truck. Organization, discipline, not drunk trespassers, not curious hikers. The man outside the door spoke again, calmer this time, Mr. Rourke, nobody's here to hurt you. Caleb almost laughed at that. Nobody ever announced bad intentions honestly. Ghost barked violently when the doorknob rattled again. Caleb kept one hand against the dog's shoulder, while the other tightened around the pry bar. "What do you want?" he called finally. Silence followed for a beat. "Then, you found something that doesn't belong to you." Caleb glanced toward the hidden compartment. "The letters, the maps, the lockbox." "Funny," Caleb answered. "Seems like it belonged to whoever hid it." The storm swallowed several seconds. Then another voice spoke outside, rougher than the first. "Just give us the documents, and this goes easy, Matt." Document. Not money, not antiques, specific. That detail mattered. Ghost's ears twitched sharply. The man nearest the western wall suddenly shouted through the storm. "The compartment's empty except for dust." Caleb's pulse slowed even more. Good. They didn't know how much he'd already removed. The first voice near the door lowered carefully. "You don't understand what you found up here." "Then explain it." Another pause. The wind screamed through the trees beyond the clearing. Finally, "That mountain road isn't safe ground." Caleb's expression hardened slightly. "I've heard that before. You should've left this place alone." Ghost snarled. Caleb heard movement outside again. Snow crunching near the windows now, testing positions, looking for entry points. Old instincts returned stronger than ever. Assess threats, control terrain, limit exposure. His exhaustion disappeared beneath cold focus. The years since retirement suddenly felt very far away. The voice outside changed tone slightly. "My employer is willing to compensate you." "There it is," Caleb muttered quietly. Money always arrived eventually. How much? Enough to disappear comfortably. Caleb almost smiled despite himself. "Buddy, if I wanted comfort, I wouldn't be sleeping in a condemned toll house." The rougher voice cursed outside. Then headlights flashed suddenly across the room as someone repositioned the truck in the clearing. Ghost barked sharply again. Caleb realized what they were doing immediately, trying to intimidate him. Flood the room with light, disorient movement, basic pressure tactics. He stepped sideways into deeper shadow near the eastern wall. The man outside the door continued speaking. "My name's Gavin Holt." Caleb filed the name away instantly. "I represent Black Ridge Development." There it was. The corporation Evelyn mentioned indirectly through local rumors about mining properties, changing ownership throughout the mountains. "What kind of development?" Caleb asked. "Mining reclamation. Lie too polished, too rehearsed." Caleb had spent enough years around intelligence briefings to recognize prepared language. Ghost suddenly turned toward the western wall again and barked twice. Urgent. Caleb followed the dog's line of sight. A thin trickle of snow had begun drifting through the exposed compartment opening where the fieldstone had been removed. And behind the hidden niche, darkness extended deeper than expected. Not a simple wall cavity. A passage, maybe. Or additional hidden space. Interesting. Outside, Gavin Holt spoke again. "You're not the first man to come looking around this road." Caleb's eyes narrowed. What happened to the others? Silence answered him first. Then, they eventually understood it was better to walk away. Threat confirmed. Ghost's growl deepened. Caleb moved slowly toward the hidden compartment, while keeping one eye on the doorway. The niche extended farther inward than his arm could comfortably reach. He swept the flashlight beams inside. Stone, dust, wood support beams, and something metallic deeper back. The old seal's instincts sharpened immediately. There was more hidden inside, a lot more. Outside, one of the men moved suddenly near the porch window. Ghost exploded forward with terrifying force, slamming against the glass opening while barking savagely. The figure outside stumbled backward through the snow. "Jesus Christ," someone shouted. "Control your damn dog." Caleb didn't answer. Truth was, Ghost probably was controlled. This was Ghost being restrained. The old Malinois had once taken down armed insurgents twice his size overseas. Age slowed him now, but not his instincts. The men outside finally backed several feet away from the Tollhouse. Caleb heard Gavin Holt exhale heavily. Then the man spoke carefully again. "We'll give you time to think." "I'm thinking fine already, Mr. Rourke. Men disappear in these mountains easier than most people realize." Caleb stared into darkness toward the doorway. He believed him. That was the problem. The mountains outside were enormous and empty enough to swallow entire lives without leaving evidence behind. Ghost kept watching the storm through the doorway gap. Ready, always ready. Finally, the men began retreating toward the truck. Boots faded through snow, doors slammed, engine started. But before the headlights turned away, Gavin Holt called out one final sentence through the storm. "You should read the last letter first." Then the truck disappeared into darkness between the pines. Silence returned slowly afterward. Only wind, only snow. Only the sound of Ghost breathing hard beside the door. Caleb waited another full minute before relighting the lantern. Warm amber light spread across the room again. Ghost paced once through the Tollhouse perimeter before finally returning to Caleb's side. Still alert, still tense. Caleb crouched near the hidden compartment again. "What the hell did we walk into?" Ghost leaned close beside him. The old dog's nose brushed against the hidden opening. Then he whined softly, not fear, recognition. Caleb reached carefully deeper into the niche. His fingers touched cold metal. He pulled slowly. Another object emerged from darkness, smaller than the lockbox, a brass tube sealed at both ends. Map case, maybe. The metal carried strange markings etched into the surface. Military-style directional symbols, coordinates, and one word scratched roughly beneath them. Vault. Caleb stared at it silently. Outside, snow continued, falling through the clearing while the Tollhouse groaned softly beneath mountain wind. He opened the brass tube carefully. Inside rested a folded paper map wrapped in oilcloth. The paper had yellowed badly with age, but remained intact. Caleb unfolded it beside the lantern. Hand-drawn tunnel routes spread across the page beneath sections of the mountain north of the Tollhouse. Mining shafts, storage chambers, underground passages. And near the bottom corner, written in dark, careful ink, "Lower vault access." Marker 9. Ghost pressed closer against Caleb's side. The old seal studied the map carefully. Several sections had been crossed out violently. Others circled repeatedly. Then his eyes found another notation. "Protected Federal Reserve Shipment Route, 1893. Caleb frowned. Federal Reserve? This wasn't just missing silver ore anymore. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains again. Another storm building behind the first. Ghost suddenly stiffened once more. Listening. Caleb heard it too now. A second vehicle. Farther down the road this time. Different engine. Lighter, approaching slowly through snow. Headlights appeared faintly between the trees below the clearing. Ghost moved toward the doorway. Alert again, but this time he did not growl. Instead, his ears relaxed slightly. Caleb exhaled. Not Black Ridge, then. Moments later, the familiar red Jeep climbed into the clearing through falling snow. Evelyn Pike stepped out holding a flashlight. She saw Caleb standing in the doorway immediately. Then she noticed the broken chain lock lying in the snow, the tire tracks, the fresh boot prints around the clearing, and the expression on Caleb's face. What happened? Caleb looked back once toward the hidden compartment behind him, toward the maps, toward Silas Vale's letters. toward the storm gathering around the forgotten mountain road. Then he answered quietly, "I think somebody's willing to kill over whatever was hidden in this place." Evelyn's face lost color instantly, and somewhere deep beneath the San Juan Mountains, hidden below forests and abandoned mining roads, the darkness beneath Marker 9 waited silently for them all. The storm worsened after midnight. Snow buried the clearing around the Tollhouse in thick white drifts, while wind pushed against the old stone walls, hard enough to make the lantern flame tremble. Outside, the mountains vanished completely behind curtains of blowing snow. Inside, Caleb spread Silas Vale's letters carefully across the rough stone floor. Ghost finally rested near the fireplace, though not fully asleep. One ear remained lifted toward the door at all times, watching, listening. Evelyn sat wrapped in one of the wool blankets she had brought earlier, hands curled around a steaming tin cup of coffee. The warm light softened the sharpness in her face, but Caleb still saw tension there. Fear, not panic. Mountain people understood fear differently. They respected it. "You really think those men would kill somebody over old papers?" she asked quietly. Caleb looked down at the maps. "I think men don't drive through a blizzard to threaten strangers over nothing." The room fell silent except for wind and crackling lantern flame. Ghost shifted slightly beside Caleb. The old Malinois pressed closer against his leg the way he always did when Caleb's pulse stayed elevated too long, grounding him, keeping him present. Caleb picked up the first letter again. The paper crackled softly in his hands. Silas Vale's handwriting remained sharp despite the years, every line written with careful military precision. November 14th, 1891, snow arrived early this year. The road north has become dangerous after dark. 3 wagons failed to arrive from Redstone Crossing this month, though Black Ridge Mining claims otherwise. Men lie easier in mountains where graves disappear beneath winter. Caleb frowned slightly. Black Ridge, same name, different century. Evelyn leaned closer. "That can't be coincidence." "No." Caleb turned another page. "I have begun keeping records separately from the company books. Too much silver leaves these mountains without accounting. Too many men vanish between Marker 7 and Marker 9. Ghost lifted his head at the sound of Caleb's voice. The dog's eyes followed every movement, calmly now. Evelyn stared toward the storm outside. "My grandfather used to talk about old mining routes disappearing after cave-ins," she said softly. "But he always said the real danger wasn't the mountains." Caleb looked up. "What was?" "The men who wanted the mountains empty." The words settled heavily inside the Tollhouse. Caleb continued reading. December 2nd, 1891. "Tonight I followed 2 freight wagons after midnight, despite company orders. They left the toll road near Marker 9 and disappeared into lower tunnels beneath the ridge. I heard gunfire underground. The lantern hissed softly. Caleb's military instincts sharpened again automatically. Hidden tunnels, controlled movement, illegal transport routes. This wasn't random frontier violence. It was organized. Evelyn looked toward the brass tube map spread beside the letters. "You think Black Ridge Development knows about those tunnels? They know enough to threaten me." Ghost rose suddenly and walked to the doorway. Not aggressive, alert. Caleb paused. "You hear something?" The dog stood motionless, then relaxed again after several seconds. False alarm. Or maybe nothing Caleb could hear yet. That uncertainty had become the hardest part of life after war. Knowing danger existed somewhere, but never fully trusting silence. Caleb rubbed one hand slowly across his tired eyes. The exhaustion sat deep tonight. Physical, mental, years deep. Evelyn studied him quietly from across the lantern light. "When's the last time you actually slept?" Caleb gave a tired half-smile. Define slept. She didn't smile back. "My brother used to answer like that too." The room grew still again. Caleb rarely spoke about the war with civilians. Most people either romanticized it or feared it. Very few understood what it actually meant to carry combat home inside your nervous system forever. But Evelyn listened differently, without curiosity, without judgment, just listening. Ghost returned and settled beside Caleb again with a soft grunt. Caleb scratched behind the dog's ears absently while continuing through Silas Vale's writings. January 8, 1892, I now understand why the company fears federal inspection. The tunnels beneath Marker 9 contain more than stolen ore. There are records hidden there, proving shipments were diverted before reaching Denver Mint officials. Men have been murdered to protect those ledgers. Evelyn inhaled sharply. Federal shipments. Caleb nodded slowly. Corruption. The old SEAL stared toward the hidden compartment. Suddenly, the entire situation felt larger than abandoned mining claims, bigger than stolen silver. Silas Vale had hidden evidence, and somebody still wanted it buried. Ghost rested his head against Caleb's knee, warm, solid. Caleb looked down at the old dog quietly. "You remember tunnels?" he murmured. Ghost's ears twitched slightly, and just like that, the memory came back again. Afghanistan. Cold underground passages outside Kandahar, darkness thick with dust and sweat. Ghost moving ahead through narrow tunnels, while Marines followed behind with rifles raised. Then the explosion. Caleb blinked hard. The memory loosened but didn't vanish. Sometimes PTSD didn't arrive like panic. Sometimes it arrived like gravity, heavy, constant, pulling old moments backward through time until they never fully ended. Evelyn noticed the change in his expression immediately. "You okay?" Caleb nodded automatically. Lie. Ghost pushed harder against his leg. "Truth." Evelyn lowered her voice carefully. "My brother used to disappear in crowds after he came home. Not physically. Just." She searched for the word. "Emotionally." Caleb stared into lantern light. "You spend enough years waiting for explosions," he said quietly. "Eventually, your body forgets how to stop." The wind moaned through cracks in the Tollhouse roof overhead. Ghost remained still beside him, steady breathing, steady heartbeat. The dog had spent years pulling Caleb back from panic attacks before they fully took hold. Sometimes Caleb wondered if Ghost understood him better than any human being alive. He turned back to the letters. Near the bottom of one page, Silas had written something darker than the rest. "If these writings survive me, know this. The mountain keeps secrets because men force it to. The road itself is innocent. Only those who hide beneath it carry evil into these forests." Caleb read the line twice, then a third time. The language felt strangely familiar, not dramatic, measured, like another soldier trying to explain danger without frightening civilians. Silas Vale had been military too, a Union veteran after the Civil War. A watchman stationed alone in the mountains guarding roads nobody else cared about. Caleb suddenly understood why the letters affected him so deeply. They were written by a man who understood isolation the same way he did. Two exhausted guardians separated by more than a century. Outside, snow eased briefly. The clearing beyond the windows glowed pale beneath moonlight, filtering through clouds. Evelyn stood slowly. "You should try to rest." Caleb looked at the stack of letters. "I think Silas wanted somebody to finish what he started. That road nearly killed people back then. It's still killing people now." Silence. Ghost lifted his head again, watching Caleb closely. Evelyn stepped near the doorway and pulled her coat tighter. "You planning to go after Marker 9? Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he unfolded the map once more beneath lantern light. The hand-drawn tunnel routes twisted beneath the mountain north of the Tollhouse like buried veins. One route had been circled repeatedly in black ink, and beside it Silas Vale had written 4 final words. "The lower vault remains." Caleb stared at the phrase quietly. Then he looked toward Ghost. The old Malinois met his eyes instantly. "Ready. Always ready." Caleb exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said at last. "I think we are." Outside, dawn still waited hours away. The mountains stood buried beneath storm and darkness. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered forests, beneath collapsed tunnels and forgotten roads, Marker 9 waited silently for Caleb Rourke and the dog who had already sensed its secrets long before any human eyes ever saw them. The storm finally broke near sunrise. Clouds drifted west across the San Juan peaks, while pale gold light spilled slowly over frozen ridges and pine forests heavy with snow. The mountains looked untouched from a distance, peaceful. But Caleb had spent too many years learning how danger hid beneath beautiful landscapes. Inside the Tollhouse, Ghost stood ready before Caleb even finished packing. The old Malinois watched every movement carefully, while Caleb checked supplies with practiced efficiency. Flashlights, rope, water, medical kit, sidearm. The brass map tube rested inside Caleb's coat pocket beside Silas Vale's final letters. Evelyn stood near the doorway watching him quietly. "You really think you should do this today?" Caleb tightened the straps on his pack. "If Black Ridge already knows about the compartment, they'll move fast. You don't know what's out there." He looked toward Ghost. "That's why I'm bringing him." Ghost's ears lifted at the sound of his name. The dog looked old when resting now. Gray muzzle, scarred shoulders, a slight stiffness in cold weather. But once Caleb started preparing for movement, something changed inside him. The years seemed to peel away. His posture sharpened, his eyes focused. Working dogs understood purpose. So did soldiers. Evelyn crossed her arms against the cold. "My grandfather used to say the lower mines north of Silverton were cursed." Caleb gave a faint, tired smile. "Every mountain town says that." "I'm serious." Her expression didn't change. He said people heard things underground after cave-ins. Hammering sounds. Voices. Ghost moved beside Caleb and nudged his hand impatiently. "Ready to go." Caleb clipped the old leash onto Ghost's harness. Most ghosts are just history people, never buried properly. Outside, the morning air cut sharp against their faces. Snow reached nearly to Caleb's knees in places as they started north along the abandoned toll road. The world felt enormous and empty around them. Pine forests stretched endlessly across the mountainsides, while frozen cliffs rose through drifting fog farther above. Ghost led slightly ahead, tracking. The old military harness still fit him despite age. Every few yards, the dog stopped to scent the air carefully before continuing. Caleb followed Silas Vale's hand-drawn map while scanning terrain automatically. Ridges, tree cover, movement patterns. Nothing moved except wind. But twice he found fresh tire impressions, partially hidden beneath snowfall near the road shoulders. Black Ridge had been here recently. That thought stayed heavy in his mind. The farther north they traveled, the rougher the terrain became. The old toll road narrowed into little more than a frozen trail winding through thick timber and collapsed rock slides. By midday, they reached the remains of an old stone bridge crossing a narrow gorge, or what remained of it. Half the bridge had collapsed decades earlier into the icy creek below. Ghost stopped immediately. Alert, Caleb crouched beside him. "What is it?" The dog sniffed along the broken stone edge, then turned toward the trees east of the gorge. Caleb followed. There, a granite milestone leaned sideways beneath snow and moss 50 yards off the road. Marker 9. Most of the stone remained buried, but the carved numeral was still visible beneath ice. Ghost barked sharply once. Caleb brushed snow away carefully with gloved hands. The old marker stood nearly 4 feet tall beneath the drifted snowpack. Deep scratches scarred one side, as though machinery or tools had struck it years ago. And behind the marker, the ground dipped unnaturally. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Not natural erosion. Collapse. Ghost suddenly lunged forward through the trees. Ghost, the dog, ignored him, moving fast now despite his age. Caleb followed immediately through dense pines and waist-deep snow until the terrain opened into a narrow, rocky clearing hidden beneath the mountain ridge. Then he saw it, a collapsed mine entrance buried beneath fallen timbers and snow. Ghost stood before it barking furiously. Caleb's pulse slowed instantly. The old wooden support beams had partially caved inward, but fresh shovel marks cut through the snow near the entrance. Someone had reopened the tunnel recently. Black Ridge. Ghost shoved his nose into the narrow opening between the beams and growled. Caleb knelt beside him. Cold air drifted outward from the darkness below, carrying the smell of wet stone, rust, and old earth. Tunnel air. He recognized it immediately. Afghanistan flashed briefly across his mind again. Underground compounds, claustrophobic darkness, bomb wires hidden beneath dust. Caleb swallowed hard. Not there, not now. Ghost looked back at him, waiting, trusting. Caleb exhaled slowly, then switched on his flashlight. All right, partner. They entered together. The tunnel sloped downward beneath the mountain at a shallow angle. Old timber beams lined the passage every few yards, many cracked with age and moisture. Water dripped steadily somewhere deeper underground. The beam from Caleb's flashlight swept across rusted mining carts abandoned beside the tracks. Dust covered everything, except certain sections of ground. Fresh boot prints again. Recent. Ghost tracked them carefully through the darkness. The tunnel twisted deeper beneath the mountain until daylight disappeared entirely behind them. Only flashlight beams remained, only breathing, only the sound of dripping water echoing through stone. Claustrophobia pressed hard against Caleb's chest. Too much like old tunnel clearances overseas. Too much memory trapped in confined spaces. His breathing shortened slightly. Ghost immediately slowed and pressed closer against his leg. Grounding. Always grounding. Caleb rested one hand against the dog's back. "I'm good," he whispered. Not fully true, but enough. Farther inside, the tunnel widened suddenly into a large underground chamber. And Caleb stopped cold. Heavy equipment filled the cavern. Modern drilling tools. Portable generators. Fresh cables running through the darkness. Black Ridge Development hadn't abandoned this place. They were actively excavating it. Ghost growled low. Caleb swept the flashlight across stacked crates near the far wall. Inside several open containers rested old ledgers, mining records, and boxed artifacts coated in dust. Historical material, illegal excavation. Then Caleb saw something worse. Dynamite charges wired along one support beam near the rear tunnel. Not active yet, but prepared. Ghost barked sharply. At the exact same moment, voices echoed faintly somewhere deeper underground. Men approaching. Caleb killed the flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed them whole. Ghost froze beside him. The voices grew louder, 2 men minimum, talking casually. "Holt wants everything moved before state inspectors show." Another voice answered. "Then we seal the lower chambers for good." Caleb's stomach tightened. Seal, destroy evidence. Ghost's ears twitched suddenly. Then the old Malinois shoved hard against Caleb's leg. Warning. A faint ticking sound reached Caleb's ears, metallic, rhythmic. His eyes snapped toward the dynamite charges. A small red indicator light blinked once in darkness. Remote activation. "Move," Caleb whispered instantly. Ghost lunged beside him as Caleb sprinted back toward the tunnel entrance. Then the mountain exploded. The blast hit like a collapsing world. Stone thundered overhead. Pressure slammed Caleb sideways into tunnel walls, while darkness filled with dust and splintered timber. Ghost barked violently somewhere ahead. Another support beam cracked. The tunnel ceiling collapsed behind them in a roar of rock and debris. Caleb shoved forward blindly through choking dust. Then he saw Ghost. The dog had stopped. Not from fear, from protection. Ghost stood directly beneath a collapsing timber beam, bracing himself against falling debris while Caleb stumbled forward. "Ghost!" The beam snapped. Rock exploded downward. The old Malinois lunged toward Caleb at the last possible second, driving him clear as stone crashed across the tunnel floor. A sharp cry echoed through darkness. Then silence. Dust rolled thick through the tunnel. Caleb hit the ground hard. For several terrifying seconds, he heard nothing except ringing in his ears. Then a soft whine. Pain. Caleb scrambled through debris toward the sound. "Ghost!" His flashlight flickered weakly back to life. The beam found the dog pinned partially beneath shattered timber and stone. Blood darkened the snow dusting Ghost's shoulder. The old Malinois tried to stand anyway, still trying to reach Caleb, still trying to protect him. And deep beneath the San Juan Mountains, surrounded by collapsing tunnels and the buried secrets of dead men. Caleb Rourke realized the war had followed them both into the darkness after all. Dust rolled thick through the shattered tunnel. The flashlight beam shook violently in Caleb's hand, while broken timber groaned overhead. Somewhere deeper underground, rocks continued falling through darkness in slow, thunderous crashes. But Caleb heard only Ghost. The old Malinois whimpered once beneath the debris, then silence. Ghost. Caleb dropped to his knees beside the collapsed beam and shoved at splintered wood with both hands. Pain tore through his shoulders instantly, but adrenaline drowned most of it away. The beam pinning Ghost's hindquarters had cracked during the collapse, but not fully broken. Chunks of stone pressed down across the dog's back legs. Ghost tried to rise anyway, still trying to reach him. "Don't move," Caleb whispered hoarsely. The dog's breathing came short and fast now. Fear hit Caleb harder than the explosion itself. Not combat fear, not survival fear, something worse. The terror of losing the last living thing that still anchored him to the world. He wedged his shoulder beneath the broken timber and pushed. The beam shifted barely an inch. Enough. Ghost dragged himself forward immediately despite obvious pain, claws scraping through dirt and rock until he collapsed against Caleb's chest. The old seal wrapped both arms around him instinctively. "You're okay," he whispered. Lie. Blood soaked through Ghost's fur along his rear shoulder and left hind leg. Caleb ran shaking hands carefully over the dog's ribs, checking for breaks. No crushing damage. No punctured lungs, thank God, but the limp would be bad, very bad. Ghost licked once weakly against Caleb's wrist, still comforting him, even now. Another rumble shook the tunnel overhead. Caleb snapped back into motion instantly. The collapse wasn't finished. He clipped Ghost's harness leash shorter and swept the flashlight toward the exit tunnel. Half the passage behind them had caved inward beneath tons of rock and snow. Only a narrow opening remained, barely enough space to crawl through. Ghost tried standing again. Failed. His back leg buckled immediately beneath him. Caleb's chest tightened painfully. The dog had carried him through Afghanistan once. Now it was his turn. He slid both arms carefully beneath Ghost's chest and lifted. The old Malinois whined sharply from pain but stayed still afterward. Trust, absolute trust. Caleb adjusted the dog's weight across his shoulders and began moving through the tunnel. The darkness felt suffocating now. Every groan of shifting stone overhead sounded like another collapse beginning. Dust coated his throat and eyes while his boots slipped constantly through loose debris. Several times he nearly fell, carrying Ghost's full weight uphill through the broken tunnel. The dog remained silent except for strained breathing near Caleb's ear. Outside, wind screamed faintly through the distant tunnel entrance. Still far away. Too far. Another flashback hit Caleb without warning. Afghanistan again. Smoke. Collapsed buildings. A Marine bleeding beneath concrete, while Caleb carried him through a destroyed alleyway under incoming fire. The memory slammed into him so hard, his knees nearly buckled. Not now. He squeezed his eyes shut briefly, focused on Ghost's breathing instead. Warm, alive, present. The tunnel tilted sharply upward. Light appeared ahead finally. Gray winter daylight. Caleb pushed harder through the debris field until they burst out into the freezing mountain air beneath swirling snow. He nearly collapsed beside the ruined mine entrance. Ghost slipped gently from his arms into the snow. The dog tried standing immediately again. Failed again. Caleb knelt beside him, breathing hard, while the mountains roared around them with wind. "You stubborn old bastard." Ghost's tail thumped weakly once against the snow. Relief hit Caleb so suddenly it almost hurt. He rested his forehead briefly against the dog's neck. Alive, still alive. But danger wasn't over. The explosion underground hadn't been an accident. Black Ridge knew somebody entered those tunnels, which meant they would come looking. Caleb forced himself upright and scanned the ridgeline automatically. Snow drifted heavily through the trees. No visible movement yet. He crouched beside Ghost again and inspected the injuries more carefully. Deep laceration along the shoulder, bruising already swelling beneath fur, possible fracture in the rear leg. The old Malinois watched him quietly throughout the examination. Never once snapping, never panicking. Military dogs learned pain discipline early. Caleb hated that fact suddenly. Hated everything war demanded from creatures loyal enough to obey humans without question. "We gotta move, partner." The nearest safe shelter remained the Tollhouse, nearly 4 miles south through worsening weather, and Ghost couldn't walk. By the time Caleb fashioned a sling from climbing rope and spare canvas, snow had thickened again across the mountains. The descent became brutal almost immediately. Caleb carried most of Ghost's weight while you navigate steep, frozen terrain through pine forests and buried sections of the abandoned road. Wind cut through his coat relentlessly. Ice gathered along his beard and gloves. Ghost remained quiet except for occasional sharp breaths when his injured leg shifted wrong. The old dog kept trying to walk anyway, trying to help. 3 separate times Caleb had to stop him from collapsing. "Easy," he muttered repeatedly, but the dog still pushed forward beside him whenever possible. That loyalty broke something open inside Caleb slowly during the long march south, because years earlier in Afghanistan, he almost left Ghost behind. The memory came fully now. Not fragments anymore. Complete. Kandahar province, extraction point under mortar fire. Ghost trapped beneath collapsed concrete after locating insurgents inside tunnel systems. Command ordered immediate withdrawal. Caleb remembered looking back once through smoke while the dog barked from beneath rubble. Then he remembered refusing orders, going back, dragging Ghost free seconds before another explosion collapsed the structure entirely. Afterward, his commanding officer told him, "You almost died for a dog." But that wasn't true. He had survived because of the dog. Always because of the dog. The memory stayed with Caleb all afternoon as snow buried the mountains deeper around them. By sunset, he could barely feel his hands. Ghost's breathing worried him more now. Too shallow. Too tired. The old Malinois rested against Caleb whenever they stopped, eyes half closed from exhaustion. Panic crawled slowly into Caleb's chest, not tactical panic, helpless panic. He had spent years keeping men alive under combat conditions, but this felt worse, because Ghost wasn't just a partner anymore. Ghost was the final witness to Caleb's entire life before it fell apart. The last creature who remembered who he used to be. Darkness fell before the Tollhouse finally appeared through the storm. A faint lantern glow burned near the windows. Evelyn. Caleb nearly stumbled with relief. The door burst open before he reached the clearing. Oh my God. Evelyn ran through the snow toward them immediately. What happened? Tunnel collapse. She saw the blood soaking Ghost's fur and dropped to her knees beside the dog without hesitation. "We need warmth now." Together they carried Ghost inside. The Tollhouse felt warmer than before. Evelyn had repaired part of the chimney enough to build a small fire safely in the eastern hearth corner, using loose stovepipe sections from her Jeep. Ghost collapsed onto blankets near the flames, while Caleb unpacked the medical kit with shaking hands. Combat medicine returned automatically. Pressure dressing, splint stabilization, shock prevention. But his hands kept trembling anyway. Evelyn noticed. "You're freezing." "I'm fine. You're bleeding too." Only then did Caleb realize blood covered one sleeve from cuts sustained underground. Didn't matter. Ghost mattered. The old dog whimpered softly as Caleb cleaned debris from the shoulder wound. "I know," Caleb whispered. "I know." Ghost licked weakly at his wrist again, still comforting him, even injured. Evelyn watched quietly from beside the fire. "You love that dog." The words hit harder than expected. Caleb stared down at Ghost for a long moment before answering. "He's the reason I made it home." Silence filled the Tollhouse softly afterward. Only wind outside. Only fire crackling. Only Ghost breathing shallowly beneath blankets. Hours passed. Finally, the old Malinois slept. Caleb remained sitting beside him on the floor, watching, afraid to look away. Evelyn handed him coffee sometime after midnight. You should rest too. Caleb shook his head. I can't. The confession came out rougher than intended. His eyes stayed fixed on Ghost. When soldiers lose partners overseas, Caleb swallowed hard. Sometimes they don't come back from it. Evelyn sat quietly beside him. You came back, did he? Caleb wasn't sure anymore. The mountains moaned outside the Tollhouse, beneath another gathering storm, while the old seal sat beside the wounded dog who had carried him through war, nightmares, panic attacks, and homelessness without ever once abandoning him. And for the first time in years, Caleb Rourke finally allowed himself to break. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just silent tears falling into the firelight while one trembling hand rested gently against Ghost's scarred gray muzzle. Because somewhere along the long road home from war, the dog had become more than a partner. He had become the last piece of Caleb's soul, still willing to fight for the man he used to be. Snow fell softly outside the Tollhouse through the final dark hours before dawn. Inside, the fire burned low beside the eastern wall, while shadows moved gently across old stone and timber beams blackened by a century of smoke. Ghost slept near the warmth, wrapped in blankets, his injured leg splinted carefully with pine slats and bandages cut from one of Caleb's old thermal shirts. The old Malinois twitched occasionally in sleep, dreaming, running maybe. Caleb sat awake beside him with Silas Vale's letters spread across the floor once more. He hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the tunnel collapse again. Ghost pinned beneath stone, the explosion, the fear, not fear of dying. Fear of being left alone afterward. Evelyn slept lightly near the doorway beneath her coat, though Caleb suspected she wasn't fully asleep either. Mountain people learned to rest without surrendering awareness completely. The storm had finally weakened, only wind remained now. Caleb picked up the final letter Silas Vale had hidden separately from the others. The paper looked older, somehow folded more carefully, as if the writer understood these words mattered most. The lantern light flickered while Caleb unfolded it slowly. March 11th, 1893. If you are reading this, then Black Ridge has survived longer than I hoped. Men change names, companies change owners, but greed wears the same face in every century. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. The old tollkeeper had known the corruption would outlive him. Ghost stirred weakly beside the fire, but didn't wake. Caleb continued reading. I have hidden the original deeds, shipment ledgers, and sworn testimonies beneath the lower vault below the toll road. The evidence proves federal silver shipments were diverted before reaching Denver Mint authorities. Men were murdered for discovering this truth. The wind groaned softly outside. Caleb's eyes moved farther down the page. The lower vault can only be opened by the brass key hidden within the wall compartment. I pray whoever finds these records understands that the road itself is innocent. Only the men beneath it poisoned these mountains. Caleb froze, the brass key. He looked immediately toward the iron lockbox near the fireplace. Earlier, in exhaustion and panic after Ghost's injuries, he had nearly forgotten the smaller items hidden beside the letters. Caleb crossed the room quietly and opened the box again beneath lantern light. Inside rested old receipts, rusted coins, and beneath them, a heavy brass key nearly 6 inches long, darkened green with age. Ghost lifted his head weakly the moment Caleb touched it. The old dog watched silently while Caleb studied the strange shape. Not a normal door key. Industrial, thick shaft, triple-cut teeth, vault key. Evelyn stirred awake near the doorway. You found something. Caleb handed her the letter. She read silently for several moments before looking back toward him. The lower vault's real, looks that way, and Black Ridge knows it. Caleb nodded slowly. That's what they were excavating beneath Marker 9. The room fell quiet again. Ghost tried standing suddenly. His injured leg buckled immediately. Caleb moved beside him fast. Easy. The dog whined softly in frustration. still wanting to work, still wanting to protect. Caleb crouched beside him and rested one hand gently against his neck. You already saved my life once this week. Ghost pressed weakly into his palm. Evelyn watched the two of them quietly. My brother had a shepherd after Iraq, she said softly. Said the dog could tell when nightmares were coming before he even woke up. Caleb almost smiled. They know us better than we know ourselves. He looked down at Ghost again. The old Malinois muzzle had gone almost completely gray now. Scars crossed the dog's shoulders from years of service. One ear carried a permanent notch from shrapnel overseas. A retired war dog, a retired warfighter, both held together mostly by stubbornness. Caleb returned to Silas Vale's final letter. Near the bottom, the old tollkeeper's handwriting grew shakier. I remained here because somebody had to stand watch after decent men stopped coming. If the records survive, then perhaps these mountains may finally belong to honest people again. Caleb stared at the sentence for a long time. Somebody had to stand watch. The words landed harder than expected. That was exactly what military life had been too. Standing watch, protecting roads, protecting people, watching darkness so others could sleep peacefully. And after retirement, after losing the ranch, after the divorce, Caleb realized something painful. He no longer knew who he was without a post to guard. Ghost shifted beside the fire. Caleb looked toward the hidden compartment again, then toward the brass key in his hand. The lower vault still existed somewhere beneath the toll road. And if Silas Vale was right, it contained evidence powerful enough to expose everything Black Ridge Development had spent generations hiding. Evelyn stood and moved beside the narrow Tollhouse window carefully. Snow still covered the clearing outside in deep drifts, glowing pale beneath moonlight. He froze slightly. What is it? Caleb asked. Tracks. Caleb moved beside her immediately. Fresh tire tracks crossed the lower edge of the clearing near the road. Black Ridge had returned during the night, watching again, waiting. Ghost growled low from beside the fire. Caleb's pulse slowed automatically. Not fear, focus. He understood the pattern now. Black Ridge didn't know whether Caleb found the vault key yet, but they suspected enough to keep surveillance on the Tollhouse, which meant time was running short. Evelyn looked toward him carefully. What are you gonna do? Stared into darkness beyond the snow-covered road, then down at the brass key in his hand. Finish what Silas started. Morning arrived cold and clear. The storm clouds finally broke apart completely, revealing endless mountain ridges glowing gold beneath sunrise. Snow sparkled across the forests while smoke drifted from the repaired Tollhouse chimney into still winter air. For the first time since arriving there, the old stone building almost looked alive again. Caleb spent the morning studying Silas's maps more carefully. The lower vault entrance wasn't located directly inside the collapsed mine tunnel, after all. It sat beneath the toll road itself, hidden somewhere between Marker 9 and the old stone bridge crossing. Ghost rested near the fire, watching Caleb constantly, while Evelyn prepared coffee over the small propane burner. Every few minutes, the dog attempted standing again. Every few minutes, Caleb stopped him gently. You're not coming this time. Ghost's ears flattened immediately. The dog understood enough words to know what that meant, and he hated it. Caleb knelt beside him. You can barely walk. Ghost stared back stubbornly. The same expression he used before dangerous operations overseas. Ready anyway. Always ready. Caleb exhaled slowly. You don't quit, do you? The dog's tail thumped weakly once. Evelyn smiled faintly watching them. He gets that from you, maybe. Or maybe Caleb got it from Ghost. By afternoon, Caleb located another detail hidden within Silas Vale's maps. A secondary notation near the old bridge. Iron access below foundation. Caleb's eyes narrowed immediately. The bridge, not the mine. The vault entrance had been hidden beneath the collapsed bridge all along, which meant Black Ridge had likely searched the wrong tunnels for years. That realization changed everything. Evelyn looked over his shoulder at the map. They don't know where the vault is. Not yet. But if they figure it out, Caleb nodded. They both understood the rest. The records would disappear forever. Outside, clouds began gathering again beyond the western peaks. Another storm coming. Caleb rose slowly and began checking gear. Flashlights, rope, the brass key. Ghost watched every movement intensely from beside the fire. Finally, the old Malinois struggled painfully to his feet and limped toward Caleb despite the injured leg. "You're unbelievable." Ghost pressed against him stubbornly. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, then rested his forehead gently against the dog's scarred muzzle. "Okay," he whispered. "One more patrol." Outside, high above the forgotten mountain road, wind swept across the San Juan wilderness, while somewhere beneath snow, stone, and buried corruption, the lower vault waited for the last watchman and the wounded war dog who refused to abandon him. The second storm arrived by late afternoon. Dark clouds rolled over the mountains in heavy layers, while freezing wind bent the pine trees along the abandoned toll road. Snow moved low across the ground like white smoke. Caleb and Ghost reached the collapsed stone bridge just before dusk. The old crossing stretched across a narrow gorge where black water rushed beneath thick ice 20 feet below. Time and erosion had torn away half the structure decades earlier, leaving only one usable side clinging to the mountainside. Ghost limped badly now. Every few steps, the injured leg trembled beneath him, but he refused to stop moving. Caleb knelt beside the dog near the bridge entrance. "You stay here if it gets bad." Ghost stared at him. The old Malinois had heard those words before. Overseas, before missions, before danger, and every time he ignored them. Caleb managed a tired smile and scratched behind the dog's ears once before turning toward the bridge foundation. The maps had been accurate. Beneath layers of snow and broken stone, iron reinforcement beams remained visible along the western support column. Caleb cleared snow carefully, with gloved hands while wind screamed through the gorge below. Then he found it, a rusted iron hatch half buried beneath debris, no larger than a cellar door. The brass key fit perfectly. The old lock resisted at first, then gave with a deep metallic click that echoed beneath the bridge. Ghost growled instantly. Caleb froze. Headlights appeared suddenly through the trees south of the road. 2 vehicles. Coming fast. Damn it, Black Ridge. Caleb pulled the hatch open quickly. Cold air rushed upward from darkness below, carrying the stale scent of trapped earth and old timber. Stone steps disappeared beneath the bridge foundation into blackness. Ghost moved beside him immediately despite the injured leg. The vehicles were already climbing toward the bridge through blowing snow. No time left. Caleb grabbed the lantern from his pack and descended with Ghost into the hidden passage. The hatch closed above them just as headlights swept across the bridge. Darkness swallowed everything. Only the lantern remained. The underground chamber beneath the bridge looked nothing like the collapsed mining tunnels. This place had been built carefully, intentionally. Stone walls reinforced with iron beams, shelves carved into rock, storage crates stacked beneath dust and cobwebs, a vault, Silas Vale's hidden vault. Ghost sniffed slowly through the chamber, while Caleb swept the lantern across the room. Then he saw them. Ledgers, dozens, federal seals still stamped across cracked leather covers, mining manifests, shipment records, signed witness statements, and on the far wall, a map showing underground routes connecting Black Ridge mining operations to federal silver transport lines dating back over a century. Proof. Real proof. Caleb exhaled slowly. They buried everything, Ghost barked once sharply. Voices echoed faintly above them through the bridge structure. Black Ridge had reached the road. Caleb moved faster. He photographed every document using his old phone while stuffing key ledgers into waterproof bags from his pack. Names repeated throughout the records across decades. Black Ridge Mining Company. Black Ridge Holdings, Black Ridge Development. Same organization, same corruption, just modern suits replacing old frontier thieves. One ledger contained sworn testimony from a federal transport guard dated 1893. 3 men murdered after discovering falsified silver weights during shipment inspections. Another contained maps of illegal tunnels, bypassing tax checkpoints beneath the mountains. And finally, Caleb found the document that explained everything. Original federal land deeds. The entire mountain corridor around Marker 9 belonged to protected federal historical territory. Black Ridge had no legal claim to the land at all. Every excavation operation was criminal. Every tunnel destruction illegal. Every threat against Caleb suddenly made sense. Ghost growled low. Closer this time. Movement overhead. Then, a violent crash shook the vault ceiling. The hatch. They found it. Caleb extinguished the lantern instantly. Darkness closed around them. Only Ghost's breathing remained beside him. Footsteps descended slowly through the stone staircase above. At least 3 men. One voice Caleb recognized immediately. Gavin Holt. "I know you're down here, Rourke." Caleb moved silently behind a row of storage crates while Ghost stayed pressed beside him. Every old tactical instinct returned completely now. Terrain, angles, movement. The vault chamber offered limited cover but only one exit. Bad position. Very bad. Lantern light appeared at the stairwell entrance as the men descended. Gavin Holt wore a heavy black winter coat dusted with snow. 2 larger men followed behind him, carrying flashlights. Their beams swept across the chamber, then stopped on the opened ledgers. Holt's expression hardened instantly. "You should've taken the money." Ghost's muscles tightened beside Caleb. The old dog waited for command, even injured. Still disciplined after all these years. Caleb stepped slowly from darkness. The pry bar rested in one hand. "Funny thing about buried truth," he said quietly. "Eventually somebody digs it back up." Holt smiled thinly. "You think anyone's going to care about century-old mining records? I think federal land fraud still matters." The larger men spread out carefully through the vault. Professional, not random hired muscle. Ghost watched every movement. Holt sighed softly. "You know what your problem is, Caleb." The use of his first name sounded deliberate. Personal. "You still think being the good guy changes outcomes." The old SEAL said nothing. Holt gestured toward the ledgers. "My family's company built half the towns in these mountains. Roads, mines, jobs." His expression cooled. "You think history's clean?" It never was. Ghost suddenly barked sharply. One of Holt's men moved too close. The wounded Malinois lunged despite the injured leg, slamming into the man's chest, hard enough to knock him backward into shelving. Chaos exploded instantly. Caleb moved at the same moment. Years of combat training took over without thought. He drove the pry bar into another man's flashlight hand, sending the light spinning across stone. Darkness shattered the chamber while crates crashed sideways. Ghost barked furiously through the confusion. Holt shouted, "Get the dog!" A flashlight beam swept wildly across the vault. Then another crash echoed overhead, not inside the chamber, outside. Vehicles, doors slamming. Voices, different voices, sheriff deputies, Evelyn. Caleb realized instantly what happened. She called authorities. Holt realized it too. Panic crossed his face for the first time. "Move!" The Black Ridge men retreated toward the stairs fast. Ghost tried pursuing them but stumbled hard on the injured leg. Caleb caught him immediately. "Easy." The dog still growled toward the staircase, still ready to fight. Outside above the bridge, shouting carried through the storm. Sheriff commands. Vehicle lights. Federal preservation investigators Evelyn must have contacted from Silverton. Holt disappeared into the snow before deputies reached the bridge. But the vault remained. The evidence remained. And for the first time in over a century, the buried truth beneath Marker 9 finally belonged to someone willing to protect it instead of hide it. Hours later, emergency lights glowed red and blue across the mountains while officials photographed the vault chamber beneath the bridge. Ghost lay exhausted beside the fire inside the Tollhouse afterward, while Caleb sat silently nearby wrapped in blankets. The old dog's breathing remained uneven from pain and exhaustion, but alive, still alive. Evelyn entered quietly, carrying fresh coffee. "You did it." Caleb looked toward Ghost, instead of the documents stacked across the table. "No," he said softly, "he did." The old Malinois opened one tired eye at the sound of Caleb's voice. Tail thump weak but proud. Outside, snow continued falling gently across the forgotten mountain road, while deep beneath the bridge, the hidden vault stood open, at last, after more than a century of silence. And beside the firelight in the old Tollhouse, a wounded war dog finally rested, knowing his last patrol had not been in vain. Winter passed slowly in the San Juan Mountains. Storm after storm buried the old toll road beneath deep snow while investigators moved quietly through the region, collecting records from the hidden vault below Marker 9. Federal land officials arrived first, then historical preservation teams, then attorneys. Black Ridge development collapsed almost overnight once the ledgers became public. Illegal excavation, federal fraud, destruction of protected land. The headlines spread far beyond Colorado. For the first time in more than 100 years, the buried history beneath the mountains surfaced into daylight. But Caleb paid little attention to the news. Most mornings he woke before sunrise inside the toll house and rebuilt stone walls damaged by winter storms while Ghost slept near the fireplace. The old Malinois healed slowly, too slowly. His limp never fully disappeared after the tunnel collapse. Some days the dog struggled even crossing the small clearing outside the toll house. But every morning he still followed Caleb outside. Still standing watch. The mountains changed with spring. Snowmelt rushed through creeks beneath the bridge, while aspens budded pale green across the valleys. The abandoned road slowly reappeared from beneath winter drifts, winding through pine forests toward forgotten mining country farther north. And little by little people returned. Surveyors first, then preservation crews, then hikers curious about the lost toll road featured in newspapers across the state. By May, the Colorado Historical Registry officially declared the old toll house and surrounding mountain corridor protected historical land. No mining, no development, no excavation. The road belonged to history again. Caleb stood quietly beside the toll house, the day officials mounted the bronze registry plaque near the entrance. Ghost sat beside him beneath the morning sun, gray muzzle lifted slightly into the wind. The old dog looked tired now, even during calm days. Age had finally caught him. Maybe war had too. Evelyn walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You realize you accidentally became local history." Caleb accepted the coffee with a faint smile. "Wasn't the plan. It never is." Below them, the old road curved through the mountains beneath bright spring sunlight. Workers repaired sections of the collapsed stone bridge while historians documented the lower vault beneath careful supervision. For the first time in decades, the forgotten route felt alive again. Ghost rested his head against Caleb's leg. The old habit still grounded him instantly, even now, especially now. Months earlier, Caleb had arrived in the mountains homeless and hollowed out by years of loss. He had expected only shelter, nothing more. But the toll house had given him purpose instead. A reason to wake up, a reason to stand watch again. That realization frightened him a little, because it meant healing had begun quietly, without him noticing. One afternoon in early summer, a government truck climbed the mountain road, carrying 2 men from a veterans wilderness program based outside Durango. They had heard about Caleb through county investigators and sheriff reports. Former SEAL, mountain survival experience, historical restoration work, PTSD recovery. The older man shook Caleb's hand near the toll house porch. "We help veterans reconnect through land conservation projects," he explained. "Trail rebuilding, wilderness mapping, restoration work." He glanced toward the repaired stone walls. "Seems like you've already been doing it." Caleb looked toward Ghost lying in shade beneath the aspens nearby. "Maybe," the man smiled. "You interested in teaching?" That question stayed with Caleb long after the truck disappeared down the road. Teaching. He hadn't considered the possibility in years. After retirement, everything had collapsed too fast. Divorce, debt, isolation, nightmares. Eventually, survival became smaller and smaller until it meant nothing beyond making it through another day. But now there was the Tollhouse, the road, the mountains, Ghost, and maybe something beyond survival waiting after all. Summer spread warm and green across the San Juan wilderness. Wildflowers bloomed beside the restored road while hikers and history volunteers carefully reset fallen mile markers along the old route. Caleb spent long days teaching younger volunteers how to rebuild dry stone retaining walls, using the same careful methods Silas Vale once protected. Ghost supervised everything from the shade. Children visiting the road loved him instantly despite his stern old military posture. The Malinois accepted attention carefully, but tolerated gentle hands against his fur with surprising patience. Sometimes Caleb caught veterans watching Ghost quietly during restoration projects, recognizing something in him. Discipline, loyalty, scars carried silently. One evening, near the end of August, Caleb sat alone outside the Tollhouse, beneath golden sunset light while Ghost rested beside the porch. The mountains glowed copper beneath the fading sun. Wind moved softly through the aspens. For the first time in years, Caleb realized he wasn't waiting for disaster anymore. No constant dread, no restless need to keep moving, just stillness. Ghost lifted his head slowly and looked toward the road. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. A young veteran from the wilderness program approached carrying survey equipment over one shoulder. The kid couldn't have been older than 24. Marine Corps. Caleb recognized it immediately in the posture alone. The young man hesitated near the porch. "Mr. Rourke?" "Caleb's fine." The Marine nodded awkwardly. "I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" The young man glanced toward the restored road winding through the mountains. "Being proof somebody can come back from all this." Caleb looked down at Ghost quietly. The old Malinois rested peacefully against the porch boards, muzzle white with age now. Truth was, Caleb still wasn't fully sure he had come back. But maybe healing didn't arrive all at once. Maybe it arrived road by road, stone by stone, patrol by patrol. Autumn returned to the mountains in brilliant gold. Aspens burned bright along the valleys while cold winds swept through the San Juans once more. The restored toll road officially reopened as a protected historical trail in October, exactly 131 years after Silas Vale hid the records beneath the mountain. A ceremony gathered near the old bridge that morning. County officials, veterans, historians, locals from Silverton. Evelyn stood beside Caleb while Ghost rested peacefully near the repaired stone wall beneath fluttering American flags. The sheriff handed Caleb a framed certificate recognizing his role in preserving the road and exposing Black Ridge's crimes. Caleb accepted it awkwardly. Crowds still made him uncomfortable. Always would. But when the ceremony ended and people slowly drifted away through the autumn sunlight, Caleb walked alone with Ghost down the old toll road one final time. They stopped beside marker 9. The stone milestone stood upright again after restoration crews repaired its base during summer. Caleb crouched slowly beside it. His fingers brushed the weathered granite surface. The same marker that had led them into darkness months earlier. Ghost lowered himself carefully beside the road, old bones stiff now, and rested beneath falling aspen leaves. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "You knew before I did, didn't you?" Ghost blinked slowly. The wind moved softly through golden trees overhead. Caleb smiled faintly. The dog had never searched for treasure, never cared about hidden vaults or stolen silver or buried corruption. Ghost had simply done what he had always done. Protected his partner, led him toward survival, toward purpose, toward life. Caleb looked down the restored road stretching peacefully through the mountains. Then back toward the Tollhouse, standing strong against the autumn sky. The building had not saved him, because of what was hidden inside the walls. It saved him, because it gave him something worth guarding again. And beside him, beneath the Colorado aspens, an old war dog finally rested easy, knowing the man he had protected for so many years had at last found his way home. If you believe some places and some people are worth fighting for, type yes in the comments. And if you've ever had a dog that stayed loyal through the hardest years of your life, tell us their name below. Subscribe and come walk the next quiet road with us. More stories about justice, grit, and second chances are waiting just ahead.